The warning tone had already screamed twice before her hands moved. Nose dip, roll left, wind shear. The FA-18F bucked once, then began to slip into a controlled spiral, the kind that usually came with a black box recovery. She didn't scream. She didn't freeze. Captain Avery Ross gripped the flight stick with both hands, leaned in, and pulled the aircraft back into line like it was part of her. Her voice crackled into the comms, low and even. Eagle 2 correcting course, pilot unresponsive, I am taking control. The control tower was a wall of panic. Voices overlapped in her headset, each command sharper than the last. Eagle 2, do you copy? You are dropping altitude. Co-pilot, confirm ejection sequence. That's a direct order. She's going to crater if she doesn't punch now. Her gloved fingers wrapped tighter around the stick. Her eyes swept the HUD. Altitude 7,100, airspeed dropping, weight uneven. The lead pilot slumped forward in the front seat, helmet tilted, arms limp over the console. No movement, no voice. Eagle 2, eject. Now we will try to track the aircraft once it hits. Avery didn't answer. The right wing twitched in the wind as she trimmed back and banked level. The jet shook, a deep vibration running through the seat. Her helmet pressed firm against the headrest. One breath in, one breath out. Not fast, not slow. The sky around her was chaos. The rest of the formation had broken pattern. One jet was already heading back. Another arced to the right, scrambling to avoid her slide. Someone was swearing over the channel. Another voice shouted her name with rising volume. She doesn't have control. Get her out. But she did. Her hands didn't shake. Her eyes didn't blink. The horizon held still now in the top half of her HUD, the gauges smoothing, the flight path returning to the numbers that made sense again. 6,800 feet, airspeed holding steady at 380 knots, engine temps normal, manual override engaged. Her left thumb tapped the channel toggle. Eagle 2 to control, requesting emergency clearance, returning to base. Pilot is unconscious. I am flying. There was a long pause. Static hummed in the headset. Then a clipped reply. Eagle 2, you are cleared for emergency return. Weather is clear. Full runway availability. All traffic redirected. She did not respond with thanks. She didn't need to. Her hands moved from memory, her feet bracing at the rudder, her eyes never leaving the forward glass. No one knew her name at the start of this flight. They would not have remembered her if things had gone the way they planned. But now, as her shadow curved back toward the base, every voice that had shouted for her to eject had gone silent. She reached for the side panel, tapped a single switch. The jet dipped slightly as she adjusted the trim once more. The sun glared along the edge of the canopy, cutting through the smudges on her scratched visor. In that reflected glare, she could just make out the shape of her helmet. Plain. No decal. No nickname. Just a serial code worn nearly invisible by time. The control stick didn't resist her anymore. It followed. Smooth. Responsive. Like it had been waiting for her all along. Avery began the descent checklist out loud, not for confirmation but for rhythm. Landing gear locked, flaps set, emergency hydraulics primed, nose angle steady. Her voice remained calm. Ground crews scrambled below, some already pointing toward the sky. Fire trucks idled at the edge of the tarmac. Spectators near the control tower pressed their heads to the glass. At 2,000 feet, she pulled the throttle back slightly and adjusted the yaw. The landing strip extended below like a taut wire strung across a waiting silence. She lined up center. Her eyes narrowed. Her hands stayed ready. She was bringing them home. The sun hit the tarmac like a hammer that morning. Heat shimmered over the concrete in waves, bending the view of the aircraft lined in their sharp rows, each one polished and prepped like a trophy. The airbase was already alive with motion. Crews wheeled equipment. Jets hissed under pressure checks. And the sky above was cut in half by the sound of engines warming up to climb. Captain Avery Ross stepped out of the personnel van alone. No fanfare. No greetings. Just a clipboard tucked under one arm and a flight bag worn soft at the corners. Her boots, scuffed and sun-faded, didn't match the fresh issue gear of the others moving across the staging area. The laces had been replaced more than once. The soles were starting to pull at the toes. Her helmet, held by its strap, was scratched across the dome with no call sign painted on the back. Just a faded serial code, like the one on a shelf no one touches. A cluster of junior pilots passed her, laughing as they headed toward the lockers. One of them slowed, then turned back with a grin. "Hey, are you crew or contractor?" he asked. "Still walking? The food tent's that way." She didn't answer. She didn't even glance in his direction. Inside the squadron briefing room, the tone didn't change. Air conditioning hummed against the outside heat. The projector flickered above a dry erase board covered in trajectory charts and names. Most of the pilots leaned back in their chairs, relaxed, legs stretched. A few scrolled their phones. Avery stood near the wall, out of the way, waiting. Lieutenant Colonel Dana Price entered briskly, the kind of pace that carried rank. Her voice was loud but flat, efficient in a way that left no space for introductions. She flipped the page on the manifest and pointed without looking up. "Captain Rosa, you'll be filling seat 2 on Eagle 2. Avery blinked once. She didn't correct her. Someone near the front chuckled. "Backup Barbie reporting in." The room laughed. Not loud, but enough. A few looked over their shoulders to see her reaction. There wasn't one. Lieutenant Jason Cole made a show of nudging his wingman. "Didn't know we had a co-pilot lottery today," he said. "Should have brought my spare helmet. Think hers is from the last century." He held up his phone and snapped a quick photo of her profile, the worn strap, the chipped paint, the quiet face. By the time she stepped out of the briefing room, it was already on his private channel, captioned, "Today's ballast. Pray for me." Out on the prep deck, the difference in status showed in fabric and fit. Most of the pilots wore flight suits with reinforced knees, tailored to exact builds. Patches on their arms marked international drills, elite squadrons, and private sponsorships. Avery's suit was standard issue, slightly faded at the collar. Her name tag had a fray in the stitching and tilted slightly to one side. She moved toward her jet with mechanical precision, not hurried, not slow. She passed a ground tech who looked up and squinted. "You sure you're in the right hangar?" he asked, wiping his hands. "We're prepping the Hornets. You looking for maintenance?" Someone nearby laughed. She said nothing. As she approached the aircraft, the heat from the tarmac rose through the soles of her boots. The Super Hornet stood with a posture like it was ready to pounce, its twin tails casting shadows behind it. Her assigned pilot wasn't waiting. He stood a few paces off, sipping from a metal thermos, his helmet already sealed and gleaming. Captain Blake Heron didn't speak when she stopped beside him. He just looked at her once, then turned toward the ladder. She followed him into the cockpit, climbed into the rear seat, and began her checks. Her fingers moved with quiet assurance. No one noticed. Down below, a pair of junior officers watched the two-seater being armed. One of them elbowed the other. "That's her. I thought she was a scheduling glitch." "Nope." Dana's panic pick. "Guess the other guy dropped." "She gonna be all right back there?" The first officer shrugged. "She just has to breathe and not push anything. The jet flies itself." The canopy lowered. The ground crew backed away. She sealed her helmet, buckled in, and placed her hand on the checklist. There was a brief hesitation before she began. Not doubt, just a pause. Out of the corner of her eye, the edge of her name tag caught the light. The stitching thread had started to unravel at the corner, curling up just slightly. The plastic cover had yellowed from sun and time. She looked straight ahead. Her HUD lit up with pre-flight sequences. Her fingers steadied on the panel. Guiding systems she'd run hundreds of times, just never from this seat and never in front of this crowd. The jet roared to life. She sat in silence. And then, without a word spoken, she was part of the sky. The trailer sat near the edge of a decommissioned strip, where weeds broke through old concrete, and the only noise came from distant trains or coyotes calling out across the dusk. It wasn't large. One bedroom, a kitchen barely wide enough to turn in, and a small table where she logged her simulator flights by hand. But it was hers. and it was quiet. Captain Avery Ross locked the door behind her as the last sunlight slipped across the faded linoleum. Her boots landed beside the mat with a soft thud. The air inside smelled faintly of jet fuel and coffee. She liked it that way. The walls held only what mattered. A photo of her and her father, Tom Ross, taken the day she first flew solo in a battered crop duster with a patched wing and a seatbelt that had to be tied in a knot. She was 15, grinning, wind in her teeth. Her father had taken it with an old point-and-shoot camera, and the print had faded around the edges like it was growing into the wall. Next to the photo was his flight journal, leather-bound, soft from years of wear. Inside were notes written in tight, blocky letters, fuel math, wind adjustments, little jokes he told himself in the margins. She didn't read it often anymore, but it was always there. A compass of sorts. One that pointed to the version of herself that hadn't stopped flying just because the world said she should. She boiled water for tea. No screens. No phone calls. The base didn't care what she did off hours, and no one sent messages anymore. Not after what happened. Years ago, she had been the youngest pilot in her class, faster than anyone on instrument checks, sharper on emergency protocols, always a step ahead without trying to show it. Her instructors said she was red flag material before she even earned her first deployment stripe. But then there was the engine failure. Another trainee had reported a known issue on their bird vibrations, sluggish throttle. The crew logged it. The flight officer ignored it. That same trainee barely walked away from a crash landing on the next sortie. Avery had backed her up. She filed a report. She named the officer. It didn't go over well. There was no hearing, no formal reprimand, no outright expulsion, just a note in her file and a change in tone. Suddenly, she was passed over. Not enough hours. Not enough leadership time. Not a good fit for command track. One by one, her opportunities vanished like fog burning off under sunlight. She had done everything right, and it had cost her everything. That was 2 years ago. Now she logged her own hours. Simulator time after the base closed. Her fingerprints were in the systems of nearly every airframe model still in service. She kept records with paper and pen. No algorithms, no cloud backups, just ink and discipline. That night, she sat at her table and opened her logbook to a fresh page. Her handwriting was neat. The heading read, Night Check, Super Hornet Systems, 1 hour, 20 minutes, full manual override training. She wrote down the wind speed from the weather report, then she adjusted it based on instinct. Her father used to say the numbers got you close, but memory got you home. He had been gone 6 months now. She had not spoken at his funeral. She had flown the simulator that night instead. Outside, the wind kicked up dust across the old runway. A windsock hung limp near the edge. Its colors faded to pale threads. It hadn't caught a breeze in years, but the habit of looking at it never left her. She took off her flight suit, folded it once, and set it on the chair by the door. Her helmet sat beside it. No decals, no call sign. The inside still smelled like sweat and foam rubber. She adjusted the chin strap with practiced fingers, then let it rest. In her drawer was a letter, not from the Navy, not from command, from a flight instructor at a nearby civilian airfield who offered her a job teaching basic turns and radio calls to teenagers who just wanted to get airborne. She had never responded. She wasn't done yet. She turned off the light. In the dark, with the quiet pressing close, Avery Ross closed her eyes and saw the sky. Not the clean blue of parade flyovers or the chrome reflections of air shows. She saw the hazy twilight of desert training grounds, the blur of green under night vision. The kind of flying that didn't want to be pretty, the kind that kept you sharp, the kind that made you real. Tomorrow, she would fly again, technically as a passenger, technically as support, but she knew how jets worked. More than that, she knew how people worked. They wouldn't see her coming. They never did. Sunrise cracked over the edge of the airfield in a hard gold line. The sky was clear, still warming, and every aircraft along the tarmac seemed to glow under the fresh light. The Super Hornets stood in formation like sharpened blades, cockpit glass catching the reflection of tool carts, safety cones, and the slow movement of mechanics finishing their rounds. Captain Avery Ross pulled the zipper of her flight suit all the way to her collar and stepped into the prep bay. No one greeted her, no one stopped, but that wasn't new. She moved with quiet efficiency, slipping on her gloves, tightening the Velcro cuffs, and checking the seal on her helmet. The padding inside was worn thin and shaped exactly to her head. It didn't need to look good. It needed to work. Around her, the others were already joking. One pilot near the edge of the bay nodded toward her and grinned at his squad. "Hope she packed gum, or a barf bag. Let Barbie try not to pass out," someone else said under his breath, pulling on his own custom-fit gloves with sponsor patches stitched near the wrist. Lieutenant Jason Cole stood near a stack of cases, phone raised, streaming a few seconds of live video. His voice carried just enough. "Backup Barbie's ready. We're gonna need prayers, folks." A few snorts followed. Nothing loud, but enough to confirm what she already knew. She wasn't part of the group. She wasn't expected to fly. She was there because someone had backed out, and they had no one left to call but her. The briefing had been short. Lieutenant Colonel Dana Price hadn't looked up from the flight sheet when she assigned her position. No eye contact, no welcome, just a slot filled. Eagle 2, rear seat, ride along. Avery had nodded once, folded the paper, and left the room before the comments could finish forming. Now she approached the jet. Captain Blake Heron was already waiting. He stood near the wing, helmet in place, arms crossed, eyes scanning the deck without urgency. He had the kind of presence that didn't need volume. Everyone knew who he was. High hours, sharp stats, always near the front of the formation. His call sign was painted clean across the side of the bird. His gear was spotless, his posture casual. He gave her a single glance, then turned and climbed up. No introduction, no questions. Avery followed. She slipped into the rear seat with practiced steps, buckled herself in, and began running the startup checks in silence. The cockpit buzzed to life around them. Switches flipped. Systems came online. The jet hummed with anticipation, a low electric energy building beneath her feet. She could feel the heat through the floor panels, the vibration of turbines starting to spin. The HUD filled with data as the canopy sealed overhead. Sunlight dimmed behind the tinted glass. She moved through her checklist without pause. Fuel levels, throttle calibration, flaps, trim. Her fingers worked quickly, methodically. She didn't need to speak. He didn't ask. The signal came over the headset. "Eagle flight, clear for takeoff. One at a time, staggered intervals. Let's make it clean." Heron didn't say anything as he pushed the throttle. The Super Hornet surged forward with a growl that climbed into a roar. The force pressed her back into the seat, but she didn't flinch. Her breath stayed steady. Then they were airborne. The jet lifted into the open sky, tilting toward the clouds in a smooth arc. Behind them, 2 more aircraft rolled into motion, flaps adjusting in perfect rhythm. Above, the lead pair were already circling, their formation tightened by the minute. Within 3 minutes, the full drill group was in flight. They moved like dancers across the air. Each bird followed the next through coordinated maneuvers, shifts in altitude, changes in heading. The choreography had been rehearsed, but it still demanded precision. Captain Heron flew aggressively. Hard turns, high climbs. He pushed the bird into rolls that clipped under the edge of protocol. Avery stayed steady, adjusting for drag, noting minor fluctuations. He didn't speak to her directly, but his breathing filled the shared channel. At first, it was normal. Then it wasn't. She heard the change, shallow at first, then a sharp inhale. Her eyes flicked to his vitals on the console. Slight acceleration, pulse irregular. "Hydration low," she said calmly, mostly to the log. He coughed once. "I'm fine," he muttered, just above the mic threshold. "Just the heat. Keep tracking." Avery made a small adjustment to the environmental controls. She noted the time. Then she resumed scanning the terrain below. The group began a climb. 7,000 feet. 9,000. Sunlight hit the cockpit in a hard burst. Heron pulled right, then stabilized, but the trim was late. His inputs were half a second behind. She watched, said nothing. Her fingers moved toward the manual override setting but didn't activate it. Not yet. He coughed again, louder this time. One hand lifted to his helmet. He flexed his fingers once, as if they had gone numb. "Altitude 10,000, heading 170, he said, voice flat. The jet wavered slightly. A small lurch. Nothing anyone outside their cockpit would notice. But she did. She reached out, ran a systems check without announcement, and watched his hands. Then, for just a moment, his grip loosened on the throttle. He blinked slowly, leaned forward, and caught himself on the panel. Avery took in a breath through her nose, controlled and quiet. The next maneuver was a coordinated loop across the southern ridge. High-speed re-entry, tight vector, one of the more complex maneuvers of the entire drill. Captain Heron exhaled sharply. Then his left hand slid off the stick completely. He didn't reach for it again. Something was wrong, and she was the only one who knew it. The cough came first. Short, dry, nothing dramatic. Then a pause. Captain Blake Heron shifted in his seat and reached for the stick again, but his hand hovered for a beat too long before settling. Avery Ross kept her eyes forward, watching the numbers roll steady across the heads-up display. Altitude 10,500, airspeed holding, formation stable. Nothing to react to yet. But her hand hovered near the manual override. Altitude check confirmed, Heron said, voice strained. Turning. Left. 30. The last number didn't come. His hand slipped from the throttle. His body slumped forward in a slow, weightless fall, as if gravity had finally decided to take him. The jet dipped hard to the right. Altitude dropped fast. A warning tone shrieked across the cockpit. G-forces kicked against the seat as the nose dropped toward the ridge below. She reached for the stick and throttle at once. Control assumed, manual override engaged, she said into the calm and precise. Below them, the terrain rose quickly. The jet trembled as she corrected, fighting the angle. The right wing caught drag and tipped again. She pulled left, readjusted flaps, tapped brakes, and throttled down by instinct. The formation broke. Eagle 2 is off path. What the hell is happening? Eagle 3 pulling clear. Eagle 4, bank away now. Control, we've got separation failure in progress. Do they copy? Comms exploded into panic. Voices layered on top of each other, sharp and cracking. Someone yelled for the emergency beacon. Another voice came through clearer air traffic control, urgent and direct. Eagle 2, your heading is unstable. Confirm pilot status. Co-pilot of Eagle 2, respond. Do you need extraction? Avery's breathing stayed even. Her hands moved faster. Pilot is unconscious. Full control is with me. Requesting emergency return route. Confirm clearance. No response yet. She checked gauges. Fuel was good. Engine pressure stable. Airspeed now at 390. Still losing altitude, but within control. She flipped 2 switches on the left console and rebalanced trim. Eagle 2, you are veering. Begin correction immediately. Co-pilot, if you cannot stabilize, eject now. Negative, she said. I am flying. She heard someone curse over an open mic. Another voicemail. Strained called again. Get her out of there. The bird's too heavy. She'll stall before she clears the ridge. But she didn't stall. She trimmed the nose up 3 degrees. Watched the horizon flatten out. The ridge no longer looked like a wall. It looked like a line beneath her. In the corner of her vision, she saw Heron's head tilted against the console, still breathing, still out. The stick moved smoothly now. The jet obeyed without protest. A few hundred feet more and they were level. Altitude 6,500, returning to base, she said. Copy. Eagle 2, hold position. We are clearing traffic. Emergency runway is open. Fire and med crews on standby. Confirmed. She cut across the comm channel briefly and spoke to the formation. This is Eagle 2. Maintain formation with Eagle 1. I'm off drill. No support required. Solo return. No one answered. Just static. She adjusted heading again. Wind buffeted the wings. but the weight shifted clean. Her feet braced on the pedals, thighs locking against the seat as she recalculated the descent route in her head. 35 nautical miles, full glide path, wind cross-flow east at 6 knots. The cockpit noise dulled, not the sound, the pressure, the kind of quiet that came when adrenaline and muscle memory blended. Her fingers knew what to do before the checklist caught up. She glanced once at the mirrored reflection of her own helmet in the glass. Nothing on it. No nickname. No decal. Just a scratched silver-gray dome with a number printed in block letters, half worn away. A voice from memory broke the quiet. If the bird talks, listen to it. If it screams, don't. Her father's words, sharp and low, from a day years ago when she first stalled on purpose just to feel it. But if it whispers, that's yours. That's the sound of trust. The jet wasn't screaming now, it was whispering. She angled 5 degrees down and watched the terrain shift below into grids of roads, lights, and rooftops. The base shimmered in the distance, runways stretched in clean, clear lines. The tower glowed faint orange in the morning sun. Control, this is Eagle 2. On final approach, request full clearance. Eagle 2, you are cleared. Winds calm. Runway 3 is yours. Copy. She tightened her harness, checked the medbay alert for Heron again, then began descent. Behind her, the formation had reassembled. Ahead of her, the field was clearing. She was flying alone, but not unseen, not anymore. The runway stretched ahead in a long, narrow band of gray. Painted lines flickered beneath the heat rising off the tarmac. Wind pulled across the surface, steady but sharp, carrying dust into the air where it swirled in lazy spirals. Red lights blinked along the edge. Fire crews waited in position, engines rumbling low. Every radio frequency had gone quiet. Captain Avery Ross adjusted her glide slope by 2 degrees. Landing gear down, she said. Her voice was calm, clipped. Her hand moved to the throttle with ease, nudging it back as the airspeed dropped into final approach range. From the tower, binoculars followed her descent. She's on profile, someone said, barely audible over the headset. At ground level, personnel had gathered in silence, some in flight suits, some in base fatigues. A few officers stood near the emergency vehicles with their arms crossed and jaws set tight. No one spoke. The only sound was the low growl of the incoming jet. The Super Hornet came in smooth, low, steady. Avery kept her focus locked on the numbers. Altitude 200, airspeed 135 knots. The HUD was steady. Her grip on the stick was light but firm. There was no tremble in her voice, no hesitation in her hands. Crosswind nudged the aircraft as she dropped through the last 100 feet. She adjusted with a subtle shift in rudder, then angled the nose gently up. The wheels hit with a clean, audible double thump. First contact, then full weight. The tail dipped a hair before the nose gear caught, then settled. Tires hissed across the concrete as brakes engaged. The jet rolled, slowed, then stopped. The fire crews didn't move until she powered down. For a moment, no one said anything. Then the canopies opened. Medical staff ran forward. They reached the front seat first, unlocking Heron's harness and pulling him out carefully. He was breathing, eyes closed, pulse strong. The medics moved quickly, lifting him onto a gurney and pushing him toward the waiting ambulance without a word. Avery stayed in her seat a second longer. Her fingers rested on the edge of the panel. The systems were still warm, the switches in the exact place she'd left them. The wind caught the edge of her helmet as she reached up, unlocked it, and pulled it free. She climbed down. Boots on tarmac. The wind tugged at her suit as she stood beside the aircraft. Her helmet dangled from one hand, its scuffed surface catching the morning sun. There was no name on it, no title. Just the faded stencil number she never bothered to replace. The crowd didn't speak. A few of them stared. One tech leaned over a log tablet, eyes scanning the data that had just uploaded from the jet's flight recorder. He looked up, his brow creased. "She flew solo," he said, turning to the officer next to him. "From manual override, full descent." The officer didn't respond. Another voice broke through, a soft one, not recorded, not amplified. She flew that entire bird back alone. The question didn't need an answer. Lieutenant Colonel Dana Price arrived next, walking briskly from the command line with 2 aides in tow. She stopped at the edge of the crowd, her gaze locked on Avery. There was a delay in her reaction. Not anger, not doubt, but something else. Recognition. Price looked at the Super Hornet, then back at the pilot who had brought it down. A few claps started near the edge of the tarmac, scattered, hesitant. Then more joined. Not loud, not celebratory, not a round of applause. Something quieter, something respectful. Avery didn't acknowledge it. She stood still. Her expression was unreadable. Her eyes tracked the motion on the field not out of pride, but vigilance. She handed off her helmet to a junior officer without speaking. The officer hesitated, looked down at the scratched surface, then back at her face. He took it carefully. Someone opened a laptop near the operations tent. On the screen, a live clip from the tower feed was already cycling through public channels. The angle showed the entire landing, the steady approach, the perfect touch, the moment the jet came to rest. On the monitor, a name began to appear in the caption bar. Not Heron's. Hers. Avery Ross. No call sign. Not yet. But, nearby, a tech with a printer label gun was scrolling through templates. He paused at one blank form, selected it, began typing. A few officers stood with their hands behind their backs, watching her in silence. She walked away without looking back. Her boots struck the ground with quiet steps, each one certain. No celebration, no correction, no permission asked. Behind her, the sun rose higher. The Super Hornet cooled on the runway. And somewhere, on a screen that hadn't even been powered on at briefing, her name was finally glowing. Not an announcement, an acknowledgement. Captain Blake Heron was stable by morning, a heat-induced cardiac event. They said dehydration, high exertion, mild altitude hypoxia, nothing permanent, nothing career-ending. He regained consciousness before the full debrief and requested to give a statement himself. "She flew that bird solo," he said, his voice slower than usual but steady. "From altitude to touchdown, I don't remember much. But I remember her hands taking the controls." No one interrupted. The press officer beside him nodded and passed the mic to the next speaker. There were no follow-up questions about his flight record, no jokes, no spin. The room was quiet. No one smirked. Outside the hospital, the media had already picked up the footage. Tower surveillance, synced with flight logs, showed everything. The moment of the dip, the correction, the descent, the touchdown. One headline read, "A-18 co-pilot lands fighter solo with pilot unconscious." Another simply said, "She never ejected." In the squadron ready room the next morning, Avery walked in carrying her flight folder and a printout of her maintenance log. The room fell silent. No laughter, no comments. Lieutenant Jason Cole, who once live-streamed his taunts, stood when she passed and offered a slow, deliberate salute. She returned it without pause. Lieutenant Colonel Dana Price sat alone in her office that afternoon, Avery's personnel file open across her desk, pages she hadn't touched in over a year. Attached at the back was a handwritten letter dated 3 years prior, a formal report of misconduct. Not from Avery, from someone else, but her name was in the margins. The ink slightly faded. Price read every word this time. That night, an encrypted message came through Avery's private inbox. The header read, "Red flag reconsideration immediate." The sender left no signature, just one line in the message body. "We were wrong." She didn't reply. Not yet. At dusk, she crossed the tarmac alone. The sun burned low on the horizon, laying long orange shadows across the field. Her boots moved in rhythm, slow and unhurried. One hand held her helmet by the chin strap, the other tucked into her jacket pocket, where a small leather journal pressed against her ribs. Tom Ross's flight book, the last thing she always packed. Near Hangar 4, a new Super Hornet stood waiting, fresh from maintenance. Its fuselage was spotless. A young crew chief crouched beside the intake panel, peeling a decal's backing with careful fingers. He looked up when she arrived but didn't speak. He pressed the new nameplate into place just below the cockpit rail, smoothing the edges with his thumb. Ross. No call sign yet, just a name, finally centered. She stepped closer, tilted her head slightly. The letters were plain, blocky. Nothing special in their font, but permanent. The crew chief straightened. Didn't know what color you'd want, he said. This is fine, she answered. The canopy above reflected the last light of the day. Her reflection ghosted across the glass just enough to make out the outline of her helmet, the curve of her shoulder, the lines on her face that had deepened with years of silence. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. A breeze pulled across the field, catching the edge of her collar. Somewhere. A jet ignited in the distance, the slow rumble of afterburners spooling up for night drills. Behind her, the lights of the control tower blinked steady. She turned once, gave the airframe one final look, and walked on. Not faster, not slower, just forward. Sometimes justice doesn't come with applause. Sometimes it lands precisely, quietly, unshakable. And this time, everyone saw. She was never supposed to lead. She was just the co-pilot. Overlooked, unnamed, treated like backup in a world that rewards noise and rank. But when the sky turned unstable and the voices around her demanded panic, she didn't flinch. She flew. Not for credit, not for recognition. She did it because she could, because she had always been ready, whether they saw her or not. This was a story about quiet strength, about a woman who carried her worth in silence and proved that leadership does not always shout. Sometimes it simply holds steady. If this story moved you, take a moment to share what you felt. Tell us your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe more stories like this deserve to be told, follow for the next quiet voice that refuses to be overlooked.